We've all heard those ambient sounds used across 90s, early 2000s video games, atmospheric drum and bass, and even movie soundtracks. In recent years, we've realized how many of these sounds actually come from 90s sample CDs such as Zero G Ambient, Ambient 2, or any of these other ones. But how are these sounds actually made? Today, I'm going to show you how. If we go back into the time period these sample CDs were made, there was one huge commonality. The sampler was being widely adopted. Sound designers used their samplers and external effects units to mangle up sounds in ways that were previously not possible. A big part of the unique sound and texture on these sample CDs is just how samplers treat sounds. Very simply, when you transpose a sample, the sampler's internal algorithms impart a unique texture on the sound. For example, if I take this sample here and then pitch it down, the sound degrades in what most people would consider to be an unpleasant way. This is why many people would perform multi-sampling, to keep the sound intact as you play through the full octave range. Ideal for clean compositions. Now, each sampler from the day had its own unique interpolation algorithm that would dictate the quality of this transposition process. Now, from a sound effect standpoint, where we want oddities, this limitation of samplers can be exploited to create sounds and textures unheard of. This is a classic example of using tools how they weren't intended to be used, pushing the limits, and trying new things. Now, to start down this journey, you're going to need to start with a sound of some sort. And you can really, literally use anything as a sound source, whether it be a Foley sample of some sort or a synthesizer note. Really, anything will work for creating these types of sound effects. And so I'm actually just going to take this patch from the Korg Triton Solar Surfing, play a single note at C3. And I'm going to bounce this down to audio, and we're going to end up with this waveform here. Now, I'm just going to increase the gain on here because a lot of the ambient sounds I want sometimes come on the tail end of the effects. So I always like to just apply some good gain, and we end up with this waveform. And so we can now start processing this. So I'm going to drag that sample into a sampler here. And the first thing I can do is just simply pitch this down, and it will completely transform the sound. And you can hear all those interesting artifacts in the sound when we pitch up or down. To go a little further here, we can send this through a massive reverb here. And what we could do is come in and bounce this down to audio next. So I'm going to hold out a long note here. This is pitched down, and we'll bounce that down to audio next. And we end up with this waveform here. Now, what we could then do is go back into our sampler here and drop that in, and we have it pitched down. And depending on the type of sound you're going, you can come in, do a little bit of EQ to maybe thin the sound out, make it a little more wispy ambient. Now, the other trick we can do here is enable polyphony inside of our sampler, which will allow us to trigger multiple notes at once. Now, I have a video on this from a more musical perspective to create pads, but this is great for atmospheres too, because if we play a low note here and then trigger a high note, we'll get all these overlapping textures. Now, another pretty common technique here was to come in and just grab the tail end, the effect tail of that sound, and create some drone sounds from just that. So if we take our play start head here, we can scrub it towards the end and just grab this ambience here and loop that up to create a nice like drone effect sound. A very common technique too was to modulate the pitch of a sample. And we have the knowledge that pitch essentially changes how fast the playhead scrubs through the sample. So modulating the pitch will speed up or slow down that playback scrubbing in real time. Great for movement-based effects. So to have direct control over how the pitch modulates, we can use something like an amp envelope to modulate that pitch over time. So I can come in, use this envelope here to drop the pitch based on whatever I sculpt on here. And you can see how that playback head starts very quickly, but then kind of screeches to a halt. Now you can even use this same envelope here to modulate other parameters like left to right panning here to create some movement on that sound. An LFO is another great way to modulate pitch with a degree of randomness and continuation. So I could come in and add an LFO here, and for pitch, for example, we could create like those wacky anime sound effects by modulating pitch with a very fast LFO. And then again, look at that playhead. You can see how the playback speed is scrubbing quickly, stopping, scrubbing quickly, stopping. And then we could even delay the start of that modulation, like so. It's a little bit of attack in before it starts modulating. So if we maybe change the playhead start. Another cool effect here is to use a random type modulator here, which will essentially randomize those pitch changes here. So we have this applied to the pitch here. Now, what's fun about LFOs and randomness on here is that another cool technique is to just let a passage run for a period of time. So if I come in here and I hold out a note for 3 minutes and I use this random LFO on the pitch here, I'm bound to end up with some really interesting and unique sounds. And I may even come in here and have it modulate the volume as well. And let's just bounce this down to audio here, and we'll let it run in quote unquote real time. And you can let this just run, go grab a cup of joe, watch a show, maybe a little Game of Thrones, and come back, and you'll have this 3 minutes of just great sound you can then further chop up and mangle. What I'm going to do is just cancel this here, and I'm going to take this, and I don't know, let's just reverse it up here, and maybe we change this to a cyclic time stretch and stretch it here. And I could then take this, throw it into a sampler, right? Pitch it way down, send it through a big reverb. We have some really nice drony sounds just at this little portion here. So maybe I'll enable Polyphony here and just play a bunch of notes. Right, I want to add some gain here. What I'm going to do is just trigger a few notes here at different pitches. And then bounce that down to audio here. And then we'll add another sampler, throw this in, send it through a big reverb. Designing sound effects is incredibly fun because there are no rules. It's a process where experimentation combined with a fundamental knowledge of music processing technique can lead to incredible results. It's not about how hard or complex the sound was to make, it's about what the final sound is. So my final thoughts here are to break free from this thinking that something needs to be complex to be good, or needs to be designed a certain way. let your intuition guide you, make some sick ambient sounds like it's 1994, and have fun. Peace out.